You don't have to do the whole number.
Nine.
Hello? Yeah, alright? You haven't got no jobs, have you? No? Alright, whatevs. Yeah, bye, cheers, bye. Right, I'm going to talk to you today about business telephone etiquette and body language. Oh, you are? Thank you. Telephone is still one of the most important tools in any business, and using it well can help improve the perception that callers have of you and your business. So we're going to talk about body language to start with. Just because the person on the other end of the telephone can't see you, it doesn't mean that your body language won't matter. Your posture and your frame of mind directly affect how you sound when you speak. I've heard of people, if working from home even, and they've got an important business call to make, they actually put a suit on. You know that, don't you, Tony? Have you ever yawned or pulled faces to your colleagues when you're on a business call? No. You'd be surprised how many people on the other end of the phone can pick up on this. They won't see the faces being made, but they'll detect the lack of courtesy in the voice. And many a sale has been lost because a potential client was irritated by the lack of courtesy shown to them over the phone. The rule is simple: always treat people on the telephone with the same respect as you would if you were standing right in front of them. Sit upright when you talk, or even stand. Very good. This allows you to use the air in your lungs more effectively and project a stronger and clearer voice. Slouching in your chair or sitting hunched over restricts the movement of your rib cage and can make your voice sound dull and lifeless, which is why I chose Paul. No offense. Smiling also helps you sound friendlier when you're talking on the phone. Also, movement and gesticulations with your hands help you sound enthusiastic and strengthen the points you're trying to make vocally. Good. Now, I'm just going to talk about dealing with complaints on the phone. Not that I get any, obviously. I'm sure some of you do. No offense. The most effective approach for a complaint call is to be a good listener. Be a good listener. Let the caller tell their story and don't interrupt. They won't want to hear anything you have to say until they've explained their issue in full. While you listen, make notes of the complaint. Ask questions to establish all the facts. Above all, don't lose your cool. If you argue, things will just get worse. Keep calm. Keep calm, Paul. This is wonderful. Keep calm. Try and establish a rapport with the caller. Use your notes. This is wonderful. To help summarise and recap the main points that your caller has made. This will also help to reassure them that you're listening and understanding their situation. Work with your customer to try and find an acceptable solution. There's nothing for you to do just at this moment, but I will be back.
Yeah,
just
thank you.
Ask them what they would like to happen next. Very often they may already have the answer ready for you, but sometimes all they want is to vent steam and get an apology. Now, here are some useful tips you can easily put into your telephone calling practice. Think of your audience. Before you make the call, have some notes so that you don't forget any points you want to say. Don't speak too close to the handset. This causes distortion, and the breath from your mouth as you speak will cause excessive amounts of noise and spittle. Bit of an ad-lib there. That makes it more difficult for your caller to understand what you're saying. By the same token, don't hold your phone too far away, because no one's going to hear you. Especially when your voice is dull and lifeless. Right. Another ad-lib. Don't mumble. Speak clearly and try to avoid talking too fast, Toby. Many people speak so quickly it can be extremely difficult to make out what they're saying. Talk slowly. Speaking slowly also makes it easier for the person on the other end to take notes or write down messages. Always keep a pen and notepad beside your phone. Actually, I have a pen and notepad next to my bed because if I get thoughts in the middle of the night, I know it's going to come out of my head by the time I wake up, so I just quickly turn the light on, make a note, done, back to sleep. Beautiful. And try and avoid saying love you at the end of the call, especially if you're speaking to the HMRC or the police. I'm all done. Thank you. Hang
on. So today's speaker we obviously have is that Mike Skinner.
Yay. from Blackwater. So his position in the company is just left of centre there. So nature of the business is obviously video and photography, and the locations he covers are nationwide so far. So his best day out is a Saturday, however he needs the Sunday to recover these days. His favourite band is Navacross, because he was in it. With £1 million cash, he would speak to Howard. And finally, a famous person he has met was Gemma Collins, which was last week. Where she seemed genuine, but still very annoying, and interrupted the shoot that he was doing for over an hour. Oh. Right, with that, we'll bring out together, welcome Mr. Mike Skinner.
So, everything I'm going to do seems to annoy Vince, so I'm going to use loads of notes and speak quite quickly. Hi, I'm Mike from Blackwater Media. I create video, photographic and drone content for businesses and events. So today I'm going to focus on some of the techniques I might use to create great images, and how we might set up and frame a shot with a camera to get the best results. I'm going to concentrate on photos for ease of the presentation today, but video work is very similar in settings, just a little bit more restricted in some areas. I'm aware that not that many people are using standalone cameras nowadays. Everyone uses smartphones. But if you go into almost any modern smartphone settings, there's a pro section, and that'll actually let you change almost all the things that we're going to talk about today. So what we're going to focus on is what those settings do and why you'd even bother. Why don't you leave it on automatic? So in order to demonstrate how camera settings are important to the final shot, I decided to go out and create some photographs just for you guys. But I immediately struck a problem, which is that if I'm taking the photos, how am I going to demonstrate the movement and the compositions in the shot and that sort of thing? So I decided that I needed a model. Fortunately, I've got access to some of the most stunning models in Kelvedon. So I'm honoured to have Michaela helping me out with on-screen art for today. I think we can agree that she's uncomfortably easy on the eye. So the first thing we're going to have a look at is shutter speed. So a camera captures an image by allowing light to hit a sensor. The shutter affects how long the sensor is showing the light for. This can vary from thousandths of a second to minutes to hours. The longer the sensor is open, the more light is allowed in, which brightens an image. But any movement we're seeing starts to become blurry. So in this shot of Michaela riding a bike in the countryside, the exposure was set to around a 20th of a second, and you can see she's actually travelled across the screen slightly in that time, which has made it blurry. So by increasing the shutter speed to 400ths of a second, the whole image is now sharp and in focus as we'd want it to be. So why, you may ask, would you not always want a sharp photograph? It seems obvious. And the answer is shutter speed gives you creative control. So in this photo, we've increased the shutter speed to 0.002 of a second. And that effectively lets us freeze even fast movement like water droplets, and it captures things that the eyes might normally be able to see. Whereas if I reduce the shutter speed to 2 seconds, we can smooth out all the water into this glass-like surface, as well as blurring all the movement in the leaves and things to give that dreamy surrounding. It is very dreamy, as you can see. So the second option we have in camera is aperture, or what stops. I'm just going to pass out a couple of these lenses. If you turn the dial on the smaller end of it whilst looking through it, you'll be able to see the aperture opening and closing. And if you can try not to drop them, I'd really appreciate it. So the aperture refers to how big the hole in the lens is set at any point. The wider the hole, the more light is allowed in, the shallower the depth of field we're given. Now, depth of field purely refers to how wide a distance range is in focus. With a shallow depth of field, really small specific areas can be in focus. With a wide depth of field, almost everything is. There's more pictures, don't worry. So creatively, I use a wide depth of field or a high aperture setting for things like landscape shots, where you want everything to be in focus, whether it's the foreground or all the way back to the horizon. But with a shallow depth of field, we can make more creative shots like this, where we can choose the focus point and blur out everything else to get people to look at the parts we want in the image. But like with shutter speed, we're also working with the amount of light available to the sensor. So if we go for a small aperture hole to get everything in focus, we also get a much darker image, as you can imagine, so just not as much light being allowed in. Which leads me to the third and final setting of the camera, which is ISO. And this stands for International Standards Organisation, which as an acronym is completely useless for saying anything about what it does. But in a digital camera, ISO is basically boosting the gain of an image inside the camera or using processing to make it brighter. So the lowest ISO setting, generally 100 on every camera, is typically the cleanest image a camera can take. But if you're shooting in a very dimly lit room, you need to increase that ISO value to brighten the image so it's more visible. It's effectively like turning up the volume of what the sensor has seen, and much like if you're cranking up a stereo, it works really well to a point and then the quality starts being degraded. If you set the ISO too high, you get what we call a noisy or a grainy image, which I've overdone on this photo to make it obvious. But again, that can actually be used stylistically if you're trying to make a vintage shot or if you're doing things like trying to emulate an old film camera. So that is the three main settings you've got on any camera and on your phones, and pretty much all you've got to work with in terms of on-camera settings. But each one has benefits and costs, and they all involve how much light is reaching the sensor. So this diagram is called the exposure triangle, and it visualises how we need to balance the camera settings to get the perfect image. It shows how with each setting we alter, we also make the image lighter or darker. So if you want a very sharp image of a moving object like the water droplets, you need a high shutter speed, but that gives you a darker image. So you have to counter that by opening up the aperture or increasing the ISO to add more light to it. If you want a very shallow depth of field, you don't need loads of light in because you're going to set it up here. So you need to increase the shutter speed or lower the ISO to compensate for that. If you don't balance the settings correctly, you end up letting too much light hit the sensor for too long, and you end up blowing out half the image like this. And everything that's pure white like that, you can't save it afterwards, it's just a set colour. If you don't let enough light into the sensor, you end up underexposing the image and losing too much pure black. And any pure blacks and pure whites, they're just flat colours, you can't do anything, you can't save it afterwards. So in order to get a correctly exposed photograph, not too dark, not too light, we have to prioritise and triage effectively the settings within the camera. The other option we often have in a camera is zoom, and it's much more useful than saving you having to just run forward and backwards to frame a shot. Zooming in with a lens can actually change the whole perspective and layout of a shot. It changes the shape of faces and objects, and it changes the visible background range, whilst keeping the foreground similar if that's what you're trying to achieve. So in this shot, the camera is set up around a metre away from Michaela's face. So generally it was about that far, it was really close with a very wide lens on it. And this leads to a face looking a little bit flat and distorted, but what it can do is offer a very wide view of the background behind. Now if you watch the screen carefully while I change it, and particularly focus on the relationship with the tree in the background there. In this photo, the camera's been pulled back around 10 metres away from the model, but the lens has been zoomed in. Now the model's got the same prominence in the photo, but it's completely changed the scene behind it and how it all looks. So this zoom length is much more flattering for portrait photography, it keeps the features looking more natural, but it also narrows the visible landscape range in the background. So a top tip, if you're ever taking photos of people or of their faces, if you can, try and step back a little bit and zoom in rather than getting right in their faces, and you'll get a much more flattering photo out of it as well. So by playing with all of these camera options, we're able to hugely change how an object can look, even if we can't actually manipulate the object and the settings surrounding it. So I know I'm rapidly going to be running out of time, so I won't get fully into how to compose and set up shots, but needless to say, there's a lot more to it than just pointing the camera at something and pressing go. So we're going to have a look at a few quick tips that everyone can apply to their photos and have a go in the future. We can look at the rule of thirds, where we can often make a photo seem more natural by not having the subject in the dead centre of it, and you're basically working on thirds lines that are running all the way down. This leaves open space to illustrate where the subject is heading into in the shot, effectively telling the story of what's to come in the future of the shot. We can look at leading lines that guide the viewer's eye towards the subject of the photo. It doesn't have to be an obvious symmetrical road like this, but it works with handrails, tree lines, even curves in the photo that the eye naturally follows towards the subject. We can use camera movement to deliberately blur backgrounds whilst keeping the subject sharp. And here we've matched the subject's movement by panning the camera while taking the photo. So to the camera, the subject effectively appears to stay still, but the background is moving, and it gives the impression of speed that you've seen quite a lot of photos. And it's also really important to think about depth in a photo. And by building up layers, it's a lot more interesting than just having everything on a flat plane. And you'll notice that your eye should sort of look to the bike first, then the model, then the tree, as your brain prioritises things based on how close they are. So there's some things to think about for family and holiday photos. Probably don't need to dress up for those ones, but mess around with some ideas, have fun with it, and you get much more interested in unique results and memorable photos that you want to keep hold of. Thank you generally for tolerating all my idiocy there. I hope you've all learnt something. Special thank you to Michaela for her unforgettable modelling. Yeah, exactly. And to my friend Bruce, who very willingly came along at the weekend to help me take photos in a field where we dressed. So if you can keep your ears out for any companies needing digital imagery, either still or moving, please send them in my direction. It's Mike at Blackwater Media.
Mike, I was just going to ask, did anyone see you?
Yes. The only one that was a concern was when we was down by the river with the little steep bank, and we heard some kids and a family coming. I was like, probably not appropriate for children to sit down there. I'm quickly throwing on clothes, and this point the dog comes tearing down and starts running around us, and they're going, come on. So,
see, the funny thing is, you do actually look like a girl in my team. So.
Like, you know, you said about settings. I mean, I've seen the main the camera, but your phone has settings.
yeah, you're on with if you go into your camera and actually click on or a lot of them at the bottom where you swipe along from camera, video, things like that. If you go to more or to the end of it, there'll be a pro settings or something like that. It doesn't always give you all of them, but it will generally give you shutter speed and ISO. Only the posher ones tend to give you aperture settings.
What's EV? What's EV?
I don't know what it stands for. Basically, it sets the light level. So if you bring it down a bit, it'll make all the photos a little bit darker, a bit higher, a bit brighter. It's the basic answer.
What's your favourite photo or video you've ever done, would you say?
Oh Christ, that's good. I went up to Manchester last year with a guy that was doing some team shots of for an architecture company. They did a load of landscaping around the BBC studios up there. And while he was doing the team photos, I was getting some of the architecture photos. And there's a lovely building in the background of that, and just as I was taking it, 3 swans flew across the shot. And just got this beautiful shot of this massive building with these 3 swans up close to it. And with that one. Just because of luck and money.
When you see a photograph of a landscape where the moon is unusually large, is that because it has zoomed?
It's generally a composite. You generally take a photo of the moon, take a photo of the setting, set them together and play.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because I don't know if you notice it, but even sometimes when you're standing there and the moon's absolutely massive, isn't it? You can't pull your phone out and take a photo of it, and it's a tiny little dot. Yeah. It's just the way the sort of light reflecting the atmosphere works. But generally, those things with huge moon and them are composites put together.
Right. What would you need to pay for a reasonable camera for taking any photographs on the days?
I'll be honest. Well, it depends what your smartphone cameras are incredible these days. Like the last photo I took of Bruce on there was from my smartphone, and without looking at it up close, you didn't really notice the difference. I don't know. I would think in that sort of £300-400 region for something that's got a full frame sensor and it's all compact and ready to go.
Very good. Are we good with that? Oh, one more, please do.
How much of a good photograph is down to luck? How much is down to your brain photograph?
I think one of the biggest things that's changed with digital photography over film is it gives us the option of taking a lot of photos and picking the best one. Right. But there's also a lot to be said of knowing what you're going for before you're taking the photo, because if you're just blindly snapping things, you're going to get a lot of crap photos. Whereas if you've got a mental image of sort of saying, okay, I want the person to be there, I want the background to be blurred, I can visualise how that's, it gives you a starting point, so you can then take that photo, look at it in the camera and go, actually that might look a bit better if that was over there, and you can then move things around afterwards. Yeah. So there's a bit of luck involved, but I like to think the skill makes the process a lot quicker and easier. Yeah.
Oh, well done, Mike. It just comes across how very professional and knowledgeable and reliable you are. And those are all reasons why we should look for referrals for you. Well done, Mike, for today.